Hello everyone, I'm Elfals, coach of the Newport Noctiles, and welcome to my coverage of Week 1 of Season 12 in the Wooper Club League. Last time I discussed my draft in the Paldean Conference of the season, where I picked up the big top 3 of Great Tusk, Iron Moth, and Hydreigon, followed up by 8 more Pokemon that created a bulky offense team that should hopefully be a lot of fun to play with in these first upcoming matches. This time in Week 1, I'm playing against Samantha and her Wooper Troopers. Samantha just joined the main league, I believe in the last season, where she had a strong set of performances before just missing playoffs, but it was still a great first season to be sure. This is actually the first match I'll ever have against her, I think, so there's no history to pull from, but regardless, I'm sure she's looking for another strong start to a season with this very strong team she's drafted. Samantha actually had the pick right after me in the draft, grabbing that Chen Pao in round 1 that I barely passed over in favor of my Great Tusk. After that pickup, she followed it up with a team of, in order of speed tiers, Chen Pao way at the top, Iron Jugulus, Paldean Tauros Aqua Breed, Haxorus, Arcanine, Tinkaton, Annihilate, Glamora, Iron Thorns, Arboliva, and Bronzong. The team feels very much built up around those top 2 picks of Chen Pao and Annihilate, which will be an offensive nightmare to deal with, supported by the hazard stacking of Glamora, a couple other really strong wall breakers, and a roster of generally bulky support pieces to pivot through. The balance of roles on the team is pretty cool, especially looking at the speed tiers, which they do look crowded in the middle, but that 86 to 108 range is prime real estate for speed stats, and she's got them covered really well, kind of restricting the speed EVs of my faster team members. For example, Hydreigon and Great Tusk outspeeding their counterparts on the speed list by exactly 1 base point, so we're going to have to run close to max speed on them. I'm going to have to be using the same format that you've seen in some of my videos before, shamelessly copied from Illogic and his style of analysis. Go watch his videos if you haven't already, they're good. But anyway, I'll be sorting my opponent's 11 Pokemon by how threatening I think they are, factoring in how likely they are to come, as well as how much prep I need for them if they do show up. I'm going to start at the bottom with Tinkaton, which is notable for a good defensive typing and a strong steel stab with Gigaton Hammer, but I don't see anything it does particularly well in the matchup. It kind of checks Hydreigon thanks to its typing, but it gets worn down and eventually loses to coverage such as Earth Power or Flamethrower. And otherwise it's really threatened by things like Iron Moth, which hits it super effectively, Great Tusk that can trade down positive with it, and several bulky steel resists on my side. Similarly, I feel like Iron Thorns could be a decent check to a few Pokemon on my side. It is really nice against Iron Moth, but that Glare and Ground weakness has got to stand out against a team that has a lot of natural ground coverage, and it also kind of struggles against things like Rotom-Mow and even the water types despite the electric typing. On to the picks that aren't quite the top 6 for me, but could very well sneak their way onto the team. Bronzong is, I think, a better steel type in the matchup than Tinkaton because of that ground immunity and its greater focus on bulk, but I do have plenty of switch-ins to it that can clear hazards or just not care about what it's doing, and it has to be scared of the 2 high-tier dark types that I have on my team. Arboliva is actually kind of useful for Samantha. Grass types, they run kind of hot and cold against my team, and this is pretty slow to be considered a threat, but I could see it playing an annoying Leech Seed stall game, which I don't have that many answers for. Or it could just try to catch one of my water types off guard and try to hit something hard with Grass Stab or its coverage choices of Earth Power and Dazzling Gleam. Lastly, this was a tough call to make, but I think Haxorus just barely misses at the top 6, mostly because of a few big matchup issues. Clefly messes with it thanks to Prankster Thunderwave and Stab Fairy moves. Fortress actually checks it quite well due to its lack of fire coverage, and Hydreigon does outspeed it by that 1 base point, making for a tough time setting up or sweeping. That said, if it's given the right opening, it could absolutely rip my team apart, and it can get a couple of those openings for sure. It can potentially threaten Hydreigon out with a super effective first impression. It's also a pretty good Terra candidate with Fire to blow past Fortress, or Electric for a Azumarill and to avoid Clefty Thunderwave, or it can do some other defensive type to give it more setup opportunities. And it's definitely a threat with a lot of potential. Onto the actual top 6 though, I think Arcanine makes it in thanks to its bulk, Intimidate, and ability to beat Fortress without too much effort. It can usually take any one hit and then threaten right back with a bunch of coverage, which includes the options of Close Combat, Play Rough, and Wild Charge, all of which are great answers to my usual go-to checks for it. Iron Jugulus is an important fast threat, and it's a little tough to check for my team thanks to a general lack of special bulk on my end, as well as my best special wall Tyranitar being very weak to Focus Blast, which this thing can and probably will run. It's not that threatening, but it's probably Samantha's best option for a general fast attacker with some bulk to keep things like Great Tusk and Hydreigon in check. Glamora is the Trooper's best hazard setter, and I'm kind of expecting it as a lead with Focus Sash to ensure at least one hazard gets up, but I also can't look past this thing's great special attack and coverage, which means that anything I'd be using to stop the hazard setup would be hit pretty hard in return. I also need to build around it hitting it with non-contact moves, because I don't want Toxic Spikes going up that freely. Glamora could set the tempo in Samantha's favor early before she brings in her top 3, which are all incredibly scary offensive threats to me. Paldean Tauros feels like a weird Pokemon to have in this top 3, but it has just the right tools to have a really good matchup into me. Base 100 speed and a water fighting typing plus Aqua Jet for priority means that it matches up well into my top 3 of Tusk, Moth, and Hydreigon, and its coverage means that it's pretty tough for the rest of my team to switch into. I really don't want this Tauros to grab a KO every time it comes in, and I do have some checks, but it definitely has a lot of potential for damage in this matchup. Up next, the other fighting type, Annihilate. It's not as immediately threatening, but after taking just one hit and getting off a bulk up or two, this is an incredibly dangerous offensive powerhouse with a boosted Rage Fist, plus Drain Punch for recovery. I'll need to take steps to ensure it doesn't get too out of hand, because it will tear holes in my team if it gets set up like that. And even then, if I'm busy preparing for the bulk up set, it could just go for an all-out offensive set with something like a Choice Scarf and claim a surprise KO. Not that that's quite as threatening, but it's not a bad idea either. This is also probably the premier tear candidate for my opponent, changing up its defensive profile to resist a hit and further power up Rage Fist while it goes for another bulk up and then gets out of hand from there. My team building has been completely warped by this thing. I'm trying to make sure I hit it hard and fast, but if it tears, it could really throw a wrench in my plans. And lastly, Samantha's round 1 pick, Chien-Pao. With base 135 speed and 120 attack essentially boosted by Sword of Ruin, this beats all of my offensive lineup naturally and whittles down any of its checks with strong hits. It can't terastallize per rules, thank goodness, and it really just gets stab coverage plus Sacred Sword and Psychic Fangs, but that's seriously all it needs to wreck house. I think a boot set with either 4 attacks or Swords Dance setup makes the most sense, with boosting items like Life Orb or Choice Band also being options that really put on a lot of pressure. Now, I don't do this all the time. I usually like to just get into the resources I have and start team building, but this time I am going to go over my exclusions for the match, since there are some weird picks that I made. Fergraf was the easiest to leave behind though. Twin Beam is funny against a potential Focus Sash Glamora, but the draft is kind of dead weight against most of the Troopers roster. And Twin Beam's multi-hit nature is actively detrimental to my plans against a Rage Fist Annihilate. Rotomote was also a pretty early exclusion. I couldn't find a set for it that I liked, with bulky sets inviting in Chien-Pao a little too freely, and offensive Scarf sets doing little to actually stop things like boosted Haxorus or Annihilate. Nondoso will also be left behind in a uniquely bad matchup against Moldbreaker Haxorus and Rage Fist Annihilate that both bypass Unaware to varying degrees. It has some merit here still. It's a great answer to Chien-Pao, and it does still ignore the buffs from Annihilate's bulk up, but what does it do back to it exactly? Try to hit back and keep boosting Rage Fist further? Get taunted by it? I don't see that matchup ending particularly well. Klefki is something I strongly consider for the matchup, with a resistance to Chien-Pao's stabs and spikes, Thunder Wave, or screen support to help with setup, but it's just not quite bulky enough to hang with my top picks for the matchup, and screen strategies are actually kind of tough to pull off with a potential Tauros being able to break through them with the Raging Bull. And lastly, this was tough, but I am leaving Iron Moth on the bench for week 1. It has a lot of potential as always, and I really wanted on the team to absorb the Toxic Spikes from Glamora, but it suffers from 4 move slot syndrome in this matchup. We want both stab moves to actually threaten the things we want to check, and Psychic to deal with Glamora, and Dazzling Gleam for things like Iron Jugulus and Haxorus, and U-turn to pivot out of its multiple checks. I feel like the item slot would also need to be Choice Scarf to grab a better matchup against Chien-Pao or boosted Haxorus, but locking into a Fire or Poison move has some pretty rough consequences against some of my opponent's setup threats. This is just not the week for Moth. With that said, I did talk up Samantha's team quite a bit, but there are some exploitable holes to take advantage of. The first is a big fairy weakness, and by extension, a big weakness to Azumarill, which is going to be our first bring. We are bringing a Belly Drum Azumarill as the win condition. We threaten out a lot of valuable Pokemon on my opponent's side. Things like Chien-Pao and Tauros and Arcanine will not want to stay in on this, and then from that position we can hopefully Belly Drum up on the switch, and then we KO everything we outspeed with Play Rough and Liquidation, and we are running out speed EVs for max speed Arvalilla just in case. And then Aqua Jet KOs almost everything else. The only 2 roadblocks are going to be Haxorus and Tauros. I'm not too worried about Haxorus. I only need 1 layer of Spikes or Stealth Rock to get it into Aqua Jet range. But Tauros has good bulk, a resist, and intimidate, so Aqua Jet just barely 2-hit KOs it. So ideally that would need to be chipped down before the sweep. Speaking of Intimidate, yes, that is a slight issue, and we want to keep Aqua Jet as strong as possible for a sweep. But the nice thing is that as long as Tauros is chipped down into that range, if either it or Arcanine comes in to force the attack drop, something's still dying to an Aqua Jet. So regardless, we're still breaking some kind of hole if Azumarill gets a setup opportunity. Even if we don't get a setup opportunity, Azumarill is just a good standalone bulky Pokemon that checks Chien-Pao, Annihilate, and Tauros, while hitting everything else for decent damage, so I would be okay with playing this a little more liberally if it doesn't look like we need that Belly Drum sweep. Still, I am going to be playing this pretty conservatively to start, so I'll be looking for other direct switch-ins to Chien-Pao and Annihilate and Haxorus. The Terra type is Water there for stronger Aqua Jets in a pinch, but I'll probably want to keep Azumarill's original typing, honestly, to resist both of Chien-Pao's priority stab moves, and I do have a more dedicated Terra choice in the back this week. Keep in mind that most of these Terras are going to be backup options, because I already have a planned one. The next thing I noticed on Samantha's team was the lack of an electric immunity, so that makes Volt Switch incredibly free from Kilowattrel. We're running a Choice Scarf this week to get the jump on things like Scarf Tauros or +1 Haxorus, or an unsuspecting Chien-Pao that hopefully doesn't think to click Ice Shard. Volt Switch is the main move I plan on spamming, and it hits for surprisingly good damage on this team. This slot is kind of my sub-in for Iron Moth. I didn't like the idea of Moth having to choose between pivoting out with U-turn or actually striking hard with a stab move on any given turn, but Volt Switch Kilowattrel can do both in one move slot, guaranteeing good progress on my opponent's team while also pivoting into my bulkier teammates to take the hits. We can afford a modest nature since we outspeed the next fastest threat by 17 base points, and that actually brings Kilowattrel's special attack up to comparable numbers with Hydreigon. For reference, modest base 105 special attack is equivalent to effectively timid base 120, so that's not bad at all. Electric and flying coverage is all we can really do, and it's all we need really, so Thunderbolt and Hurricane make sense, while Air Slash is nice to secure KO when that inaccurate Hurricane is unnecessary. This set is only resisted by Iron Thorns on the team, which we would just full switch out of anyway, so we could actually get some pretty crazy use out of Kilowattrel. As for the EV spread, we took our speed down to creep Iron Jugulus, creeping Tauros. I don't know Samantha's EVing habits, so underspeeding the max speed Scarf Iron Jugulus feels like a risk. But the extra EVs are being used for bulk, and we kind of need them. We can actually take a Jolly Chien-Pao Ice Shard from full if we need to, and we can also sponge a once boosted Annihilate Rage Fist in a pinch. It's really not that resilient, I'm not planning on taking any hits with it, but having just enough bulk to switch in on those things and get off a fast attack could be the difference maker. And lastly, one tech I really liked was putting competitive on this set as an answer to the 2 Intimidate users on my opponent's team. If, for whatever reason, we end up getting one of those to switch in on Kilowattrel, a +2 modest electric move will hurt anything, no matter what switches in to take it. And if we're on a tear with that, maybe we could even tear our electric to rip things apart. Kilowattrel sweep, maybe? Should be a fun set. We'll hopefully be playing it to give it several opportunities to just use that Volt Switch to pivot in and out. Speaking of which, we're going to move right along to a bulky piece with full physically defensive Fortrace. This is our main switch into Chien-Pao, and also a pretty good check to Dragon Dance Haxorus, hitting both hard with Gyro Ball in return. The most Chien-Pao can do to us on switch-in is with a Choice Band Crunch, which just misses out on the 2-hit KO even if it's adamant, and Haxorus has no tools to do more than around 35% unboosted, unless it decides to Terra Fire or maybe Fighting, in which case it opens itself up to being hit by some of my other Pokemon. Outside of Gyro Ball for damage, we have Rapid Spin to be a somewhat reliable hazard remover, Volt Switch for slow momentum, and Spikes. I'd really like to set up one layer of Spikes early, since it gives that chip we need for a +6 Azumarill to KO that Haxorus with Aqua Jet. Spike stacking is also a potential strategy here, if we get the chance to do it, since unless I'm mistaken, I think the Trooper's only removal option is Mortal Spin from Glamora, which Fortress itself does block. We have Terra Water, just to give us a mix-up in a pinch, again, to get like one extra turn in the face of fire coverage, but that really shouldn't come up. Overall though, Fortress is here to check 2 very big specific threats, and we're going to build the rest of the team so it doesn't have to come in too often, since this set can get chipped down pretty easily with only leftovers as its recovery. To that end, the next set I'm going over is Great Tusk, which is offensive with the Yashi Berry to lure in and KO the Chien-Pao. Like I said, I don't want Fortress to be forced in by that thing too much, so this is one less Pokemon that's weak to Ice for all intents and purposes. As for the moveset, both stabs are good, but we're actually going with Earthquake instead of Headlong Rush for a few reasons. We can use Earthquake to outspeed and KO the Glamora without activating Toxic Debris, and this also gives a consistent no drawback move to spam into Annihilate without lowering our defenses. I see a situation where we would switch Great Tusk in on Annihilate, and while it boosts, we just need to get as much damage off as possible with that Earthquake without lowering our defenses too much with the potential headlong rush. It's true that Earthquake will be punished if the troopers bring Arboliva for terrain support, but I'm more afraid of the former threats than Arboliva, so I think I'm going to be okay with that. Knockoff is great into anything, hits Bronzong super effectively, and removes Annihilate's leftovers, which is very valuable. And Rapid Spin takes a little pressure off of Fortress for removal duties after an early game Glamora barfs up his hazards. This leaves us with a set that will hit everything for good damage while taking whatever hit it needs to, I think, so it's essentially guaranteed progress, I hope. Up next we have Hydreigon with yet another Resist Berry. This is a Chople Berry set with the goal of luring in that Paldean Tauros and punishing a close combat with a KO in return. And if that doesn't come up, the Chople Berry is pretty darn useful for Annihilate, as well as things like Bronzong Body Press or Arcanine Close Combat. Other than that, this is a fairly standard set with stabs and earth power to get great damage into anything, and in the last move slot we actually have Nasty Plot. I'm not planning to use this for traditional setup sweeping, but instead it's specifically for Annihilate if it thinks it can set up in my face. If it comes in to go for a bulk up, I can Nasty Plot alongside it and then try to KO it, usually most sets from full, with a boosted move on the next turn, and the Chople Berry is extra insurance for me to make that read. This is actually probably my best play into the bulk up Annihilate set, since it should one-hit KO, like I said, most variants of it without taking too much damage in return, as long as the berry wasn't used up to deal with Tauros. The Terra type here is Steel. This isn't our main Terra candidate, but it's a close second since it helps Hydreigon win a lot of matchups it normally wouldn't. If I find myself sweeping with a Nasty Plot boost, I could pull the trigger on Terra versus something like Chien-Pao going for an Ice move, or Haxorus going for a First Impression, or maybe even Arcanine going for Extreme Speed, and then we can keep the sweep going from there. Speaking of the other Terra slot, I'm using Terra Fairy, Special Defense Tyranitar to round out the team. As a Pokemon, Tyranitar switches well into Iron Jugulus and Glamora, and takes advantage of them to either get off a strong hit or set up rocks. But with the planned Terra Fairy, we're employing a similar idea to Chople Berry Hydreigon, taking advantage of all the fighting coverage coming our way, and turning that quad weakness into a resist. This turns the tables on Sacred Sword Chien-Pao, Annihilate, Focus Blast Iron Jugulus, Paldean Tauros, Close Combat Haxorus, Close Combat Arcanine, as well as Body Press Bronzong, and hits back extremely hard thanks to the great coverage of a Fairy-type Terra Blast against this team. The EV spread is standard specially defensive, but I actually want to draw attention to the sassy nature. We're specifically avoiding a special attack reducing nature on Tyranitar, because in an interesting interaction against Tauros, our uninvested attack actually drops lower than our special attack thanks to Intimidate, and Terra Blast becomes special, hitting the specially frail Tauros a lot harder. As for the ability, we do want Sandstream for the chip on specific threats, as well as the special defense boost before Terra, and unfortunately that means we'll be taking Sandstorm chip after we turn into a Fairy type, but I think that'll just have to be fine. With the expected brings, Sand should be doing more harm to my opponent than to me. Alright, so hopefully that gives a pretty good idea of why I built the team that I did, and where my head's at going into the match. I think with the team I built, the thing I'm most afraid of is Annihilate going Terra Fairy, since I left my Moth behind, and I couldn't really fit Steel coverage onto Hydreigon or anything like that. But hopefully the existence of Iron Moth in the Teambuilder discourages that option, we'll see. But anyway, with all that said, let's get into our first match of the season. No Tauros is a nice relief, instead replaced by Iron Thorns, making this the battle between both of the Hydreigon and Tyranitar forms. I don't mind that change, it means my Hydreigon can be used as more of a dedicated Annihilate check, and it also makes an Azumarill sweep super free if I set up properly, since a boosted Aqua Jet should one-hit KO literally everything on the Trooper side of the field. Although I'm gonna have to be careful about that Iron Thorns, not quite sure what it wants to do. As for the lead, Kilowattrel was always the plan as a quick way to get a hit in and pivot out. The Iron Thorns as a strong resist makes me hesitate a little bit on that, but I'm going to go with it anyway, and probably just full switch out against most other leads for this information. Good luck, have fun to Samantha. The Glamora lead just makes a lot of sense here. No problems with me just going for this immediate Scarf full switch to do just under half. Looks like no bulk in it, so I would guess it's a standard offensive spread. As for the switch-in, I thought here that Samantha is either going for hazards or some kind of stab move, so Great Tusk felt safe enough to help clear any of those hazards she might set, and I do just eat a Sludge Wave for my troubles. That's some decent chip, but we're in a pretty good position. Now, from here, I do just want to threaten this thing out. I really don't want to start this game with hazards up on my side of the field, so I am just going to Earthquake to make sure of that. but of course Samantha is just going to make the good switch into Iron Jugulus, avoids the Earthquake. It was pretty telegraphed anyway, so fair play. I am definitely threatened out by a flying move here, so time to bring in the counter, Tyranitar, my dedicated check, set that sand, and avoid the Hurricane. Well, that's some good luck, but we shouldn't be taking too much from that anyway, so whatever for now. But on this turn, I am scared of the Focus Blast coming out, and I don't actually have any moves to hit this thing without terastallizing. I didn't carry rock coverage, so I am just going to pop my Terra now and go for that Terra Blast. As after this Sandstorm chip, she actually sets the Electric Terrain, and then I get a little over half damage with the Terra Blast. I gotta say, Manual Terrain sure wasn't what I was expecting, but we're going to move along for now. I'm just going to go for the KO here. As another Hurricane misses, that's really lucky, and we do grab that KO, getting the first KO of the season for the Noctiles and bringing us to an early 6-5 lead with a chipped Great Tusk and a chipped Glamora, Electric Terrain up, and my Terra revealed. We've used up some resources early, but we're still looking pretty good. And then in comes the Iron Thorns as a revenge for that Quark Drive boost. And I have to wonder what it's up to right now. Samantha has to know that I could be running Earthquake for that 4x super effective, which I am. So a Terra does seem likely here, but I really have no idea what the type might be, and I can't afford to mess around with this thing. I could make the switch to Great Tusk, which should check it, but I think I'll just stay in with T-Tar and get that immediate damage with Earthquake, get some good chip off, get some information. And it does Terra into Fairy even, and Dragon Dances up as that Earthquake goes in for a little bit of damage, followed by that nice Sandstorm chip. Well, I am sure glad I didn't switch in Great Tusk here. It looks like we both had very similar ideas in prep, trying to get the jump on each other's Fairy weakness, and it's led up to a mirror match between two Fairy-type Tyranitar forms. What a way to kick off Gen 9. As for the actual situation, well, one thing I am really relieved to see that Annihilate won't be changing its type later, but this +1 Quark Drive Iron Thorns is about to tear something up. And Tyranitar is already out here. It's at full health, we should take a hit. It's done a pretty good job of beating Iron Jugulus already, so I don't mind trying to trade down a little bit. So we're going to see what happens as I go for my Terra Blast. We shouldn't get one to KO by anything, but the Terra Blast, that cuts it really close, 89% as it reveals the Life Orb, and I also crit my Terra Blast in return. That's another really lucky break for me in a string of lucky breaks for Tyranitar. And I'll go over the consequences of these first few turns a little bit later. For now, though, I will just sack off Tyranitar, who's already done a great job of basically neutralizing this future Paradox core, as we will just go down to the Terra Blast, as Life Orb Chip takes the Iron Thorns into 5%. So we've basically taken care of them, almost, as there's that pesky 5% left, but it's an easy revenge for Scarf Kilowattrel, as I'm just going to Volt Switch out to take out that last chip of its health. 5-4 game with both of our Terras expended. I did go with Great Tusk as the switch in here because its matchups look at least decent against most of the team. I am going to be honest, I expected to bait in the Qian Pao here, so I was a little surprised to see the Glamora come in on the switch advantage. We outspeeded naturally, so this definitely sets off alarm bells for Choice Scarf, but what do I do about that? If it is Scarfed, which I'll assume for now, its coverage is most likely either Dazzling Gleam or Energy Ball. That would make Fortress my only really safe switch in, but I can't really risk that. I don't want to switch into a special attacker and take a lot of damage. I kind of need to preserve its health as the best answer I have to Qian Pao, that we also haven't seen yet. So I think I am just going to have to be okay with potentially sacking off Great Tusk for information here. Here we see the confirmed Scarf lock-in. It does outspeed. It does give me some opportunities here. So I did just click Earthquake, go down. It's a bit unfortunate. But it does give me a nice opportunity to bring in a Zoom for free. And with the Glamora locked into Dazzling Gleam at this point, I think I can Belly Drum up here pretty free. She'll actually stay in to hit another Dazzling Gleam, and I'm set up with about 44% after the Citrus Berry. I did hope that she would try to switch out on my setup, because now Azumarill probably can't take the whole game. We probably go down to Arcanine Extreme Speed plus Qian Pao Sucker Punch if they have those moves. And to be fair, what was even going to switch in on Azumarill at this point? But still, this isn't the worst thing in the world. We'll still get some progress in starting with an easy Aqua Jet right into the Glamora, which actually gets up its T-Spikes on the way out, of course. And now Samantha gets to choose her revenge option, which will be the Arcanine. No Intimidate, interestingly enough. Maybe this was her Iron Moth answer. But either way, I'll be happy to take this thing out. Extreme Speed is expected, and it KOs. I was surprised. I was really supposed to live that, and a quick calc does show this is most likely an Adamant Choice Band Arcanine, or a very high roll on Jolly Band. The item is definitely banned for sure. So in the last few turns, I actually have given up a lot of the advantage I gained early in the game, and it looks like it could be a very close endgame now. So it's at this point, I'm kind of starting to think about what I need to do to preserve the win. Looking at both sides, my opponent has a Banded Arcanine currently locked into Extreme Speed, as well as Chien-Pao and Annihilate, both of which have yet to hit the field. On my side, we have Scarf Kilowattrel, Choppleberry Hydreigon, and Fortress, all at full health, and all of them are luckily immune to those Toxic Spikes that are set up. I do have the right tools to win here, but it's a matter of how to play them. The easiest piece of the puzzle is that Fortress is needed to beat Chien-Pao, but it does not want to be in against Arcanine or Annihilate. One of either Hydreigon or Kilowattrel should be able to at least trade down with the Annihilate one-on-one, but I will also really want both of them relatively healthy to comfortably deal with the full health Arcanine staring me down, because I don't have anything that can one-hit KO it. But first, I do need to pick something to send in on the Arcanine. Fortress would resist the E-Speed that it should be locked into, but it's a little too passive to do much back, especially when the switch-in is probably Annihilate. I also was just scared that I did the calcs wrong and that it could still go for a fire move here, so I did not want to risk my Fortress like that. So instead, I am going to revenge with Hydreigon, and the goal here is either to damage the Arcanine with Earth Power or threaten it out. Based on my calcs, it does look like Banded Extreme Speed has a slight chance to 2-hit KO here, so I really can't afford to mess around. I am just going to ensure the damage with Earth Power, as, of course, the Annihilate is going to switch in to take it. That just makes sense. We actually have some good news, though, because we see the leftovers, meaning this is probably the bulk up set which we are kind of designed to beat, and the Earth Power damage just shows max HP, no special defense investment. So Hydreigon should beat this. First, we are going to Nasty Plot up, as actually it doesn't bulk up, it goes for Drain Punch and pops the Choppleberry right now. And now this should be a free Draco. Even if the Annihilate switches out, something is going down, and Samantha can choose whatever to sack off. If she decides to preserve the Annihilate, that's a bit of a problem, but Kilowattrel can come in later with the stab flying moves and hopefully take it out. But she is just going to, I believe, choose to sack the Annihilate right here. Now, it goes down. That is a big threat out of the way, and now we're actually up 3-2. Her revenge is naturally going to be the Chien-Pao, and I think just a switch out to Fortress is necessary here. A double out from her to Arcanine would put me in a very bad spot if I do that, but I don't think I can afford to lose Hydreigon with that Arcanine sitting in the back. So into Fortress we go, and no double switch. We do get the read right. We take that Sacred Sword really easily, no problem. From here, the play is actually pretty easy on this turn. There's just about no chance she leaves this on Fortress, so Volt Switch feels free. And yep, Arcanine comes in, and I pivot right out. I spent a lot of time deciding on what to pivot into, but came to the pretty easy conclusion of Hydreigon. I'm just looking for the Earth Power damage. I need this thing damaged right now. But every time this interaction happens, it's scary because the Chien-Pao could come in on the Earth Power, take maybe a little under half, and force in Fortress on a double back into Arcanine. But as of right now, I am in the advantageous position of getting off the damage that I need. If Samantha does make that Chien-Pao play now, it'll be forced to take the damage on its way in, and while that does force another risky Fortress switch in on that potential Arcanine double, it means that the next time I have Hydreigon in on Arcanine, she won't be able to make that play again, since it looks like Earth Power has a chance of 2-hit KOing, or at least it brings the Chien-Pao into Draco range. And if the Arcanine stays in here to KO me, Earth Power should bring it very low, paving the way for a Scarf Kilowattrel endgame. We are spec'd to take that Jolly Ice Shard from Chien-Pao, which it looks like it actually is Jolly based on the calcs on Fortress. So let's make the move. We're just going to go for the Earth Power now. The Arcanine stays in and chooses Extreme Speed, probably the best case scenario as we take it down to low health with Earth Power. It means that Fortress is the most free switch in the world to take the next one, as we did confirm ban multiple times now. And from here, Gyro Ball is just an easy KO on the Arcanine. Chin-Pao could not switch in on it, and this is basically the game. Chin-Pao comes in now, but it's pretty trivial. It can't really do much to me. Tries a Swords Dance up for a win condition, but Gyro Ball would just claim the KO and the match 3-0. Good games to Samantha. That endgame ended up being a lot more simple than what I had imagined going into it. I'm not even sure if my explanation was that coherent, but that was my thought process. And to be fair, yes, I did overcomplicate things. That Arcanine was really threatening at the end with the move slots to KO my whole team, but it's a lot less scary once it locks in a move that I can switch into. I think there were a few instances where I could have honestly safely switched in Fortress directly into it, since there was hardly any chance of it using a fire move into Hydreigon. That was kind of the problem. Flare Blitz threatens Fortress, Close Combat or Play Rough threatens Hydreigon. Extreme Speed is very threatening to kill a Wattrel, but it cannot do all three, and there's only the one switch it can make into Chien-Pao, and eventually you're going to have to lose too much health switching out and back in. With that said, though, that Arcanine put in a ton of work at the end, completely stopped the Azumarill sweep before it really got started, threatened everything. Such a good Pokemon. I think I have talked enough about the end game, though, and I did say I would circle back to that early game and the luck that went in my favor multiple times leading up to the Tyranitar getting KO'd. So we're just going to go back a little bit here. We'll start here with the switch in on that missed Hurricane, and this one really doesn't matter much. We know from the later turns that this Iron Jugulis is actually carrying a terrain extender. Didn't mention that before, but it wasn't important. So no boosting item, meaning that the Hurricane would have done about 11% to me. With a turn of Leftovers Recovery in the sand, that alone wouldn't have pushed me into Iron Thorn's Terra Blast range, which left me at 11% exactly. Now, the next turn, I Terra here, fearing the Focus Blast. She gets her terrain up, whatever. And then on the next turn after that, the Hurricane, hang on. There it is. It misses again. And this one is the one that actually matters a lot more. Without the resist or the Sandstorm buff, we would have taken maybe around 40%, well within range for Iron Thorns to KO me after one turn of setup. After that, the last piece of RNG, after the Dragon Dance, the Earthquake, we live on 11% on the next turn. And then we do get that crit into it after I survived the Terra Blast. This actually didn't change my play at all for the Revenge. It would have had about 15% more HP after this interaction without the crit, and that's still well within Scarf Kilowattrel range, so really wouldn't have changed much. So really the second Hurricane is all that mattered for the end, really. So if it had hit, I would have been in a much worse position against a much healthier Iron Thorns. Probably would have still brought in Kilowattrel as a revenge, sacking it for the damage, and then it most likely would have fallen into Aqua Jet range from there. And then all else being equal after that, we would be walking into the endgame 2-on-3 with Hydreigon and Fortress taking on Arcanine, Annihilate, and Chien-Pao. Now we did actually win the endgame that we actually did without Kilowattrel even coming in, but the victory would have been a lot tighter at the very least. A lot could have gone wrong, and she could have even made different plays based on that and taken the win. But anyway, I've been talking a lot about this. I'll wrap up by saying that there is some tightening up to do with my play. I'm a little disappointed in how I kind of threw away my advantage state by misplaying Great Tusk and Azumarill a little bit in the mid-game. And looking back, I probably should have set rocks with T-Tar at some point, considering what Banded Arcanine was doing at the end. But I am happy with the game overall. I don't think these are huge mistakes, mostly hindsight. And most of my team members did exactly what I needed them to do. Hydreigon is probably the MVP for its performance against Annihilate and Arcanine, though followed by Tyranitar and the early game progress it made, partially thanks to luck. That is a wrap for Week 1. We're off to a 1-0 start for the season with a 3-0 differential. In Week 2, we get to play Greg and his Quiet Majesty, a new coach to the main league, but not one to be taken lightly after he pulled out a clutch win against the Wobbuffets in his Week 1 match. See you then in Week 2.